and welcome to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group Weekly Meeting for September 22nd, 2016. Every time I say that, I do glance down at the date because I've gotten that wrong on the slide before. I'm Patrick Rogers. I'm joined here with Vesa Juvonen, and we're going to go through another great weekly meeting, and we're going to talk a little bit about that weekly schedule here at the end. We talked a little bit about that last week, but let's dive right in. So starting off, as we do every week for folks that might be new to the call or new to listening to the recordings, this is the SharePoint JavaScript Special Interest Group, JavaScript Client-Side Development SharePoint Framework Special Interest Group, so targeting all those sort of client-side development areas. And we're part of the larger SharePoint Patterns and Practices program. And so we aim to do two things during this, what will become a bi-weekly meeting, where we have an open discussion around the SharePoint framework and the client-side development patterns associated with that new framework that's out. Vesa is going to talk here in a little bit. We've got drop number 4. Update number 4 of that is live now, as of yesterday, I want to say, maybe 2 days ago. We'll talk about that, get an update there. And then as well, building the JavaScript core component library, which is to help aid so efficient data access and make it a little bit simpler to use the SharePoint REST APIs in the context, again, of that client-side development, or in fact as well Node.js development. So the aim is to support kind of that broad, in big air quotes, JavaScript platform for folks, TypeScript, of course, as well, included in that. And so you've got two links down there at the bottom. The one at the top is to our aka.ms SharePoint PnP community, and that goes now to the Microsoft Tech community, where you can post your questions there. It's still early days. We're still working out exactly how all that's going to work. I know it's not exactly on parity with what we were doing in Yammer at this point, but it is where we're at for now. And then as well, the dev.office.com/SharePoint is sort of your landing page and launch point for a lot of different updates and ideas and links and things around SharePoint in general, SharePoint development, and especially the SharePoint framework. It's also a great place to get access and find samples and tutorials, and we are working to improve and evolve all of those resources as we go. So if you have specific feedback around those things, certainly open to hearing that. A great place to do that is, of course, in the tech community. Just let us know there what you really feel about how things are going. So our agenda for this week, latest updates about the SharePoint framework. We've got some updates again for the JS core component, and then we've got a great community demo from Waldeck, again, around Azure from client-side web parts with implicit flow. Really great pattern, really great demo, so look forward to that as well on this call. And then as always, we'll close out with an open discussion, sort of open forum for questions, ideas, and things like that. So I'm going to pass it over to Vesa, and he'll give us an update now on the SharePoint Framework Developer Preview and where we're at there.
Okay, so a few things from this side. So first of all, the drop number 4 came out yesterday morning Pacific time. Well, actually it was released on evening or nighttime on Pacific time, but the release notes were coming out at 6 a.m. Pacific time, so which is like right about almost 24 hours ago. The release notes are containing what's actually updated. There's a lot of internals updated on the system as well. And the release notes are also explaining how to upgrade your existing stuff. Obviously, if you create a new client-side web part using the latest version, those are using the new drop 4 stuff by default. Can we go to the following slide, because you're actually leading, Patrick, on still. I'm not going to take over because you continue in a second. So these are coming step by step. So first of all, the drop number 4 is the number 1 thing. If you click one more time. You're my lovely assistants, Patrick. There we go. Awesome. There we go. And one thing kind of related on this one, because we're still seeing questions around it. So dev.office.com/SharePoint is the location for all of the tutorials and technical articles. There's multiple upcoming guidance articles which are in a queue. Some of them are already written, some of them are in technical review right now, and those will get merged to the dev.office.com/SharePoint. By Ignite, which means by Monday, most likely. We do welcome contributions. So if you go to the SP DevDocs repo, you can actually contribute in articles, or if you find an issue on the existing articles, you can actually do that as well. The SharePoint Framework web part sample repo, fully active now. We're getting actually a lot of nice activities on that one. So if you click one more time, Patrick, here's a list of all of the web parts which we have currently available in the dev branch. So within the SharePoint Framework web part sample repo, we are doing gradual merges between the dev and master. Slightly depends on what's coming in and what do we need to double check and all of that stuff. So there's an Angular to-do web part from Waldeck. There's a CDN example, how to reference stuff, jQuery stuff from CDN. There's the photopile example from Olivier from Microsoft France. There's the React Azure AD implicit flow sample, which Waldeck is going to show today. There's the Office Graph sample, which is also a great example on getting access on the latest documents or trending documents using the Office Graph API. And that, by the way, is intentional. So it's using the Office Graph API, not the Microsoft Graph API, because Microsoft Graph does require the Azure AD implicit flow to be completed. So the Office Graph APIs you can call with an identity and access token what the person already has, because the JavaScript is hosted in SharePoint. If we are accessing Microsoft Graph, we need to do an additional things with an Azure AD implicit flow. And we're going to walk that through, or Waldeck is going to walk that through in this call as well. React organizational chart, React search, SharePoint CRUD is there as well, and to-do web part sample. The SharePoint CRUD, from my perspective, is probably the most valuable one to show how do we do typical operations using Angular, React, PnP JavaScript core component, and also without any library. So it actually has 4 different web parts, and then you can compare differences between Angular, React, and JS core. So really great example. And we do have a webcast on that one as well, by the way, in the PnP video channel. To do web part sample, well, is coming from engineering. We will, but that's way too complex, so we will further simplify that one. It is using unnecessary complexity within the implementation because it's coming from the real engineers who seem to think that everything has to be complex by default. So we'll get it further simplified and much more fine-tuned later on. But more than welcome. We do welcome community contributions. So if you're writing a scenario, if you're writing something which is demonstrating new capabilities, all of those samples are more than welcome to the repository, and you will absolutely get credited in our monthly communications through PnP. But I think that's it. I don't actually have anything more on the SharePoint framework side right now. So everybody has been more or less concentrating on Ignite. The Ignite in Atlanta is next week, and we don't have, let's say, humongous amount of additional things for this week. But after Ignite, there will be more and more additional interesting stuff in the queue. So. But let's talk about that one after Ignite, because we can't disclose what we're going to talk about in Ignite at this point, unfortunately. So, Patrick, take it away.
What a tease. What a tease.
Yes.
So, a little quick update here on the JavaScript core components. Activity continues there in the core components. As always, we'll talk a little bit about contributions and how you can get involved in a second. But first, I want to pause and thank everybody that's contributed so far to that core component, the JavaScript core component. Very much appreciate it. Thank you to everybody that has contributed. It's been a little quiet in the last couple of weeks, but we've gotten a few nice little fixes from some folks, and then we've also had some folks report some issues, which is fantastic. Love to get those issues in. I don't love to get issues in, but I do love when they're reported so we can get them fixed and resolved and just make a better product for everybody. But really appreciate that, and as always, thank you to everybody that's contributed, whether reporting issues or contributing code through pull requests. It's very much appreciated by myself and the rest of the core team. As well, your names will bubble up to the monthly Patterns and Practices meeting to get you some extra recognition there. And I think I haven't said this for a couple weeks, or maybe I have. Again, please double check the authors file if your name is not correct or you would like to be listed somehow differently, for example, with a company name as well or something like that. Very happy to make those changes, very happy to get folks the recognition they absolutely deserve there. So thanks again to everybody that has contributed. So what's been happening? I've kind of condensed, we'll talk about this a little bit here in a second, but I've kind of condensed, before we used to kind of step through, we had a stand-up, and then we had a what's going on in the Yammer and the Gitter and all those sort of things. So I've kind of condensed it to one slide to what's been happening, just to kind of not break things out and make the conversation hopefully a little bit more clear as to what's been happening all up here around the JavaScript core component. So to go through these, a few issues reported with the post-install dependency on typing. So let me explain this a little bit and explain what we're doing to resolve this. So now that a lot of folks are starting to actually install the package in their SharePoint framework projects, it was found that, and I knew this, but I didn't know it was sort of a blocker. So you have a dependency on this library called typings, which is what we chose within the core component to use to pull in our typing information for the TypeScript project. And I had added that, I thought at the time, helpfully, as a post-install step for the library. So when you installed it, you would automatically get the typings added to your project, and that would be great. Except the problem with that approach is not everybody has typings, and you have to have typings globally installed in this case to make this integration work. So not everybody has typings installed, and not everybody wants to use typings at all, right? They might have some other tool. As with everything in open source, there's other tools out there. So what the steps we've taken, I have removed, it's not merged with the dev branch yet, but I've removed that post-install step to automatically install the typings. And as part of this, when we do push this out into prod, and then obviously updating the NPM package and so forth, we will update the documentation, both the getting started using the library documentation in your projects and the getting started contributing documentation to reflect that there'll now be an extra step to install the typings. But I'm going to make sure in the documentation it's going to list out what the typings are that are required, have sample typings.json files if you want to continue to use typings, or you can take the values from there to whatever tool you might want to use. So hopefully this is removing an obstacle to adoption. Obviously, I've talked a lot in the past about keeping those two hats on, both the development hat, the contribution hat, and then as well the hat for usage and consumption of our work. So hopefully this is going to help with that consumption story. But that work is not checked in yet, so for now, no changes to what anybody is doing. And like I said, we'll update the documentation and make that very clear when I do like the 105 release blog post. I'll explain it again in there, as well as describe, with pointers to the additional steps for install. So great feedback on that. Really appreciate it was Waldeck and Vesa and some other folks actually internally here at Microsoft, I think, that caught that one. So we'll get that resolved. Appreciate that getting brought up. Questions on large lists. I've seen there's a couple out there now. There's been some in the past on large lists. We are using the REST APIs for our calls, and as such, we are limited by what the APIs support, and that is a good thing. We don't want to circumvent those APIs, so if you are working with a large list, you will have to get it in paged chunks of data, which is from a performance standpoint, much better, and would, unless you're doing something via like a timer job, I would encourage you that I can't really think of a good case in the browser where I would need to get all the items from a very large list. So again, please do think about performance when working with large lists. And if you do need to get the data from a large list, we do support through the REST API. You can actually there's a paged items collection, and you can go through that method to get and aggregate all those items. You could store them all in an array, or I would more recommend kind of processing them as they come through to sort of speed things up and again help performance. But we are limited by the API, as we should be, so there won't be ever added to the library some type of a get all items sort of method. It's something we talked about in the past, and it's something I kind of want to discourage. There's definitely patterns out there to aggregate those items using the paging. So a question on using the blob/file types from a form. I tried to answer that in the issue, so hopefully that's clear. I'm not sure if the gentleman that asked that question is on the call. Have a look at that. Please do let us know if that works for you or not, and we'll try and get you sorted out there. Batching questions. There was a question on batching. Remember, the batch object has its own execute method, and so that execute method needs to be called. The methods, all the what do I call it, child promises will not be executed until that batch.execute is called as they're sent in that batch. And then batching does have limits, so large batches may not all complete. Something to keep in mind as well working with batching. And then one other note, as of the 1.0.4 release, the batch.execute method does return a promise, and that promise is designed to resolve once all of the child promises contained in that batch have resolved. There might be a bug with that related to post requests. Somebody's mentioned that out there in the issues list. Haven't had a chance to look at that. So there might be an issue, but GET requests, so if you're batching a set of GET requests, those should all be working just fine and as expected there. We are gotten some great feedback again from the community that when using the library with Webpack and then importing, say, the web object and then trying to package your project in Webpack. So if you wanted to open a web with a specific URL and not directly from like the pnp.sp.web kind of entry point, there are some issues around packaging. Specifically, while those classes are exported, there seems to be an issue with Webpack picking those up, and essentially the idea is we need to sort of export those near the top level. So working on that, again, great feedback from the community, and so working on that, I'm trying to start out with exporting a more limited set of things so we don't clutter the entire interface. But again, that'll be part of leading to the next point, 105. So once, in my mind, 105, once we get those typing issues I mentioned resolved, which those are resolved, but then also getting this export stuff and this Webpack stuff resolved, I think we'll be all set to do a 105 release. I think that's enough improvements to provide value to another release. But so I'm targeting that tentatively in my head for the week after Ignite. So if you have other things out there in the community that you're working on or would like to get into an upcoming release, you've got about a 2 weeks notice for getting that stuff in. If you've got something really cool that you need a tiny bit more time on, go ahead and let me know. But probably looking to do a 105 release the week after Ignite. I don't have a day in my head yet. It'll kind of be, like I said, once those other things are resolved. And maybe some feedback will come out of talking with folks at Ignite, and we can roll that into 105 as well. So, 2 links to get in there at the bottom to the community and then to our Gitter site. Gitter is a great place if you have quick questions or just sort of more informal, and then use the community for those times when you've got something that might be worth sharing with the whole community, right? So if you've got a question that you think might apply to lots of folks, use that community, because that way we can sort of share that information out. I think the Gitter is great for quick things, but stuff tends to get lost in the sort of stream, I think, a little more quickly as opposed to on the community site there. So that's what's been going on. Looking forward to the 105 release. Again, I think some great improvements and fixes to our usage story, which I think is super valuable. Opportunities to contribute. Want to remind everyone again, write a web part if you've written a web part. I would love to have you demo it on this call, simple or complex. I think it's very valuable for us to all learn from each other and see what folks in the community are doing. I know a lot of the time I see folks do stuff I personally maybe would never have thought of, so I think it's very valuable. So I would encourage everybody, have a shot at writing a web part in the SharePoint framework and let us know. I would love to have you show it off on this call. And as always, just bonus points for using the JS core library. Imaginary bonus points that don't actually get you anything, but bonus points nonetheless. Testing, any help, we get, like I said earlier, we're getting great feedback and great issues coming in. Don't love when there's issues, but I love getting them reported so we can get them resolved. So if you're using the library, testing the library, let us know if you run into problems, because we do want to address those as quickly and as efficiently as we can. Help writing tests. I'm going to keep saying that probably as long as I live. So help writing tests, just comment on issue number 40 to grab an area, and then still looking for anybody that would like to help with styling our documentation site. So I think it's a really high visibility opportunity for someone that might want to get involved there, has a lot of CSS experience, and it uses handlebars templates. So if you already know or want to learn handlebars, great opportunity there. But super high visibility opportunity to contribute and styling the site. And if you have questions on how to get started with that, there is a GitHub issue for that you can comment on, and I'll respond and try and help you out if you're looking to get involved with styling the documentation. And by styling, I mean you essentially have free reign to lay out the site, improve the navigation experience, etc. I'm wide open to suggestions on that. So, changing the special interest group meeting to bi-weekly. We mentioned this last week, and I think it makes a lot of sense. So our upcoming schedule for this meeting is going to be today, September 22nd. We're going to have the meeting, as everybody here on the call is guessed. Then we're going to do a special live from Ignite meeting at the Office Dev PnP booth on September 29th. That's going to be at Ignite. So if you're at Ignite, open invite to come on by and be part of the show. We're going to try and hopefully it won't be too loud. Folks will be able to hear us still. But so come by, say hi, be live on the webcast from Ignite, and we'll be gathering questions and ideas and at Ignite as well. So come by, just kind of generally the PnP booth if you're at Ignite. Meet folks from the core team. We're there kind of on a revolving schedule. Would be really excited to meet anybody that's going to be there from the community and get your feedback both on the JS core component, this special interest group, as well as anything patterns and practices. So stop on by and see us. And then after that, our next meeting will be October 13th. So we'll be skipping a week, and then we'll go from there to having an every other week meeting after October 13th. And the goal here is we've gotten, again, responding to feedback from the community, we have a lot of patterns and practices meetings, and a lot of folks were saying it was just too much, and they were having to sort of skip things that they might want to go to, but that their week was having patterns and practices meetings, almost every day, right? And so our goal here, and not just for the special interest group, we're doing this kind of all up in patterns and practices, is to have fewer but more valuable meetings. I think all of these meetings are valuable, but I think if we can pack a little bit more content into a bi-weekly meeting, make it a little bit more have more stuff happen between the meetings, right? A weekly cadence, not a lot happens each week, but hopefully now with a bi-weekly meeting, we'll get a little bit more happening each meeting and have a little bit more updates to share as we go through. But we'll all remain active on the various social channels, so the Gitter, the GitHub, the community. Those are still going to go, every day. Feel free to post there. But these meetings are going to move to bi-weekly. We'll be updating the invitation, and then as well, I will. For the first couple of skip weeks, I will join in and probably just be showing a static slide reminding folks we've gone to bi-weekly. So just wanted to update everybody on the call for that. Hopefully we won't lose anybody in the transition. And so now I think Waldeck is on the call. We're all set. Got a really cool demo coming up. Waldeck, are you all set?
I am actually trying to share my screen, so let me know where you can see it.
Awesome. I got loading on my side.
Three, two, one.
Go.
Is it? Is it there?
All good. All good.
Yep, I've got it on my side.
Awesome. So the sample that I'd like to show you guys today is one that uses React and the Microsoft Graph to show you the list of upcoming meetings for the current user. So with that, let's add the web part to the page, the workbench. And I am logged in. I'm cheating. Sorry for that. It's actually the fact that you get, so now you can actually see the way it works. But it actually skips the first important step. Right? So imagine, let me clear it again. Let me clear some internal information, remove the web part, and refresh the page. And then we will add the web part again so that actually you can see the whole end-to-end flow. So we add the page, and the first thing that you see is the sign in button so that you can see the meetings. And the reason for that is that even though we are already in SharePoint Online, we don't have the access to the Microsoft Graph yet. And the reason for that is that SharePoint Online uses forms-based authentication, whereas the Microsoft Graph is based on auth. And at the end of the day, it's one and the same account, but not at first. You don't get the access to the Microsoft Graph implicitly. Right? So for that, we have to go through the first step so that you sign in, you explicitly say that this app, this web part has the access to Microsoft Graph.
And by the way, Waldeck, on that one, just to kind of elaborate on that one, so obviously it won't be every single time you're accessing a page with this kind of a web part, because that is storing the access token for that app. So it will be the first time, and then there will be the 2 weeks refresh token for the app by default, right, Waldeck?
Yes, but then with implicit flow, you don't get the refresh token. So that's a security measure that's in place.
Yes. Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
So we will explain all of that. So actually, now that we talk about the Microsoft Graph and all of implicit flow in more detail, we will have tutorial that will, and we'll have actually both tutorial and the guidance that will explain all of that, that will talk about things that you have to take into account, security measures, and all of that, so that you will know what are the do's and don'ts when you want to use the Microsoft Graph with SharePoint Framework client-side web parts.
And then I have to actually slightly elaborate on that one, because it's not just for Microsoft Graph, right? Because it could be a web service, it could be your custom web service, which could be connected to your on-premises, as an example. So it could be whatever custom web API which has a service bus to connect to the on-premises to get data and all of that. So it's not only Microsoft Graph, but anyway, the process is exactly the same.
Yes, so it is relevant to everything that you have as secured with AAD. Yeah. So with that, let me just finally click the button, okay? And now pay attention, because it will go very fast, because I am already signed in. The only thing that you will see is pop-up that pops up, disappears, and it works. So there is the pop-up and it's gone. Because it's already so fast, because I already am signed in Office 365. I don't need to sign in with the same account again. I don't need to type the password, because I'm already signed in browser, right? And if you work a bit with implicit flow, particularly with Angular, you might remember that in the past, if you had a single-page app, you went to the login page on Azure. You had to type in your credentials there, and then you got back to the page with token in a hash of the URL. We could use exactly the same approach, but if you think about it on an intranet, when you have one web part on a page, or actually a few of them, and imagine that there are each of these web parts is an independent app that uses its own token. In order to log into all of them, you would have to go back and forth for every single page, or for every single web part, reload the whole page and do it like 5 times. That experience would be very poor. And then, on the other hand, like, why would you reload the whole page for one web part? Right? So with that, because we use the pop-up and React, we don't need to reload the whole page. We can just open the login page in a pop-up, and when the offload is done, we can react to it in React, and actually only refresh the web part, or the part of the web part that shows the data, right? So with that, we can really easily do that. And what you see eventually is that we reach out to the Microsoft Graph, and I can show you that in the network stack. So here, you can see that we have the whole offlow. We get the tokens. So if you write really fast, you can get my access token, which is good for the next 2 minutes. So you can have the token that I use to access the Microsoft Graph, which is here. And then if we go back to the network stack, you actually see me making a call to the Microsoft Graph when I want to have all calendar events starting from now until the end of the day, ordered by one, or ordered ascending, and all that, and all of the properties that you see here. And with that, what I get with that is I get the 4 events that I have, and then I will show only one, because there's one thing that's related to how the date is stored. I get event in another time zone, and then when I convert them to UTC, it turns out that one of the events is not today, but actually tomorrow. So that's why we get 4 events here, but you only see 3 on a page. So the way it works, and that sample, depending on when you watch the video or if you are now in a call, will be available to you very soon, right? And it actually is available in the dev branch, and it will be available as an official sample, approved and checked, verified soon. So it's a React web part where we have one component that does all of the job, and we use the ADL.js library to actually authenticate with auth and AAD, and we use it with implicit flow. So for that, the first step, if we go to Azure, to our Azure portal, Azure AD, and actually there's the nice thing, since not that long, you have the ability to access your Azure AD apps from the new portal, which isn't all that new now, but that ability is really great. And although the interface isn't exactly the same, the one thing that we can really easily do is edit the manifest directly in browser. So for example, here, let me go all the way back. Here I am in my AAD. I choose apps. From here, I get the list of all my apps that I created. When I open this app, I can click the manifest, and here I can actually see the contents of the manifest in browser. So if I wanted, for example, to enable implicit flow, in the past, I would have to go to this page. I would have to click Manage Manifest, Download Manifest, open that in Editor, edit it, upload it again. Here, I can do all of that directly in browser. So I can go here. I can choose auth implicit flow. I can set it to true, save, and I'm done. But then also on the other hand, so that's my app. That's how my web part get access to a calendar, right? And in order for it to do it, I have to grant it access to my calendar, and I do it by typing one of these GUIDs and then another one which I know by heart. No, which I don't. So actually for this part, although you could edit it here if you knew the GUIDs, it's just easier to go to the alt side, and here you can choose that you want to have the Microsoft Graph, and you can just pick the right permission here from the list, which is read user calendars. And that will translate internally into one of these two entries. I don't know which one.
Waldeck, there's a great question from Sebastian. Sorry for jumping in on this time, but
sure,
does it mean that we will have a reply URL per page that uses the web port?
Yes, exactly that, because that's actually, if you think about auth implicit flow, the contract between, so the only way Azure AD can trust whoever issues the request is based on URL of the page. So that's the contract between the web part and AAD that basically says that I am the web part. I am the one who you can trust, right? Because if you think about it, there is no other way. So eventually you will end up with multiple, if you would want to use the same web part on multiple pages across your site, then you would need to define all of these URLs as return URLs, and here, reply URLs, here you can have the whole list. So here we have only one page, and then you would have to have one for every single page on your intranet. So that's definitely not the web part that users would add by themselves, right? So you can think about it that there would be, for example, on the landing page of your intranet or personal location or department page, but not on every single site, because you don't want to manage these URLs here per site, and whenever a user would add the web part to their page, they wouldn't be able to add the URL here, right? So that would have to be the admin, the Azure AD admin, who actually adds these URLs here. So that's definitely a thing that you have to take into account, and that's definitely a thing that we will include in the guidance, how to work with that. Once all of that is in place, you can use ADAL.js to actually sign in, and all of that is simple and comes down to calling this authentication context.login. And ADAL.js library will take care of all of the flow and login page, pop-up page, and all of that. And of course, for that, you have to pass some additional info, like for example, the ID of your app, the endpoints to which you want to have access. So you have to pass all of that, but once you do and you pass the config that you have here to ADAL, which you do in constructor here, you can actually also say that you want to use pop-up and not the authentication flow based on a hash that will reload the whole page. And then with that, you also have to say that whenever the pop-up comes back, you want to react to it. And with that, as you can see in React, we only change the state of the user, which we keep track of here. And whenever that changes, we actually load the meeting. So initially, the signed in state is false. And then whenever it's changed to true, we update only the web part, or actually even the part of the web part where the meetings are shown. So with that, we can really easily and lightweight react from the web part to changes that take place outside of it. So with that, I won't dive into big detail with the rest of the code because there are quite a few things to walk through. But you will see sample, you will see description of it, and you will see tutorial how to build your own web part that uses auth, implicit flow, and AD. And then finally, you will see the guidance coming out as well, discussing all the things that you have to take into account whenever you want to do that. Because one of the things is, if you think about it, that token that you see here gives the access to my calendar. But if there was another web part on a page, it can grab the token and it can pretend to be the web part that I've built, because that token is available within the browser to any element on a page, right? So with that, that's one thing that you have to take into account. And again, we will thought about all of these things that you have to take into account whenever you think about leveraging the Microsoft Graph in SharePoint Framework client-side web parts.
Yeah.
And with that, I am finished. And if there are no more questions, I will give it back to Patrick.
I'm going to just a quick comment on the latest point which Waldeck said. Yeah, so, and Patrick, you can take over the presentation already, but really the challenge, obviously we can do the implicit flow with Azure AD, but like Waldeck said, the challenge of this one doing this is the fact that if you have web parts from multiple different vendors and there would be a malicious client-side web part, which is sniffing if there's any client IDs in the page or access tokens in the page, you could theoretically leak that. Now, which sounds horrible, but then again, the only way you can actually put the client-side web part on a page is that the tenant administrator explicitly installs the client-side web part and makes that available. And while you're doing the client-side web part installation, we are explicitly raising a big red flag, which is where we're saying that you need to trust these things. These are almost like the classic server-side full trust web parts, because in the 2007 or 2010 environments or 2013 or in on-premises in general, if you're using server-side code, you are actually accessing anything what the user has access. So in the same way, the client-side web parts are full trust web parts. They're just running in the browser side, running in the JavaScript because they're built with JavaScript. So it's not really that much different than what it was in the farm solutions, but we want to make sure that people do understand the technical and the security implications. So additional guidance coming out, tutorials coming out, or article around that one. And there will be additional support natively within the product as well around the implicit flow capable or getting access on the data in Graph. When, we don't know. Let's see, or we can't comment at this point. We don't want to guess the date at this point, but it's coming at some point. But Patrick, take it away. You can. I don't think we have that much stuff anymore waiting.
Nope. Great points, guys. Waldeck, awesome demo as always. Really appreciate it. If you guys haven't checked out the demos the samples that are out there, please do. There are some really valuable content out there. It really shows off some great techniques. And to the points that were made, I think in the past a lot of developers have just sort of defaulted to, site collection full control kind of manifest with their permissions. And I think as we move into the world of client development, it's really something folks are going to need to concentrate a little bit more on, and remember that any permissions you expose to the browser, whether you've written anything to use them or not, a user could do those things. So we actually had a question, I think it was on Gitter, around why can't we just elevate users using a client ID and secret in the browser? And the answer is theoretically you could, I suppose, but you're exposing whatever permissions you've given to that client ID secret pair to the world, and then anybody could take that and do anything. So something to keep in mind. I think permissions, folks are going to need to be a little more focused and a little more careful around exactly what gets granted to what, both in the Azure AD space as well as just what's being exposed to the client side. So something to keep in mind. So moving forward, now plenty of time left for our open forum Q&A, so feel free to come off mute or type into the IM window. Happy to take your questions, comments, etc. Nobody?
Nigel is writing. We can say that Nigel is typing.
I missed that.
I have a question.
Sure. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. We're in the process of migrating our Office 2010, our SharePoint 2010 team sites on-prem to Office 365. We have some customizations that were written using server-side code, and I plan on re-engineering them using the PnP library. And I'm just curious what the best place to store that is. I had heard some mention on the discussion boards that people thought that should be put in the Content Type Hub site. so that it would be accessible by everyone and I could have just one copy. Is that a best practice?
So just so I understand, you're talking about the JavaScript files that might be created for these client-side web parts?
No, just for the PnP.js file.
Yes.
Just your library. I want one copy of that.
So lots of ways to do that. You could pick a SharePoint site, whether it's the content type hub or not, and use that as essentially as a CDN. Understanding you'd have to make sure permissions work so that folks can get to that particular site. So some folks will set up a specific site collection with no other content other than those JavaScript files. So you can do that. We are looking at getting the JS files added to a public CDN, but a lot of them are based on popularity, so I would encourage everybody on the call to star our repo, and then we're looking at trying to use, Waldeck can remind me, it's cdnjs.com, provides a public CDN, so we're looking at that, and there's also in the future, Vesa can talk to timelines maybe, but there's actually going to be in SharePoint Online. I'm not about to say something I shouldn't, Vesa, right?
You're about to say something which we shouldn't, but there will be announcements related on your question, actually still later this week. If you're watching the dev.office.com/blogs, you'll find out something which might be relevant for you related on your question. But we can't actually say it yet because it haven't been yet announced.
I didn't say it. I'm proud of myself.
Pretty close. Pretty close.
But so there are definitely options.
That sounds like a future thing, but I'm doing this now. So what I hear you say is that you'd probably recommend creating a separate site collection for that rather than using the content type hub.
I recommend that because then you can just make the permissions to that site just anonymous, wide open, whatever to your organization. And because you don't necessarily want everybody to get into the content type hub, and you then have to worry about library permissions and all that kind of stuff. So I like the idea of just setting like sites/CDN, right? And then our library, jQuery, React, whatever else you might use, that's a great place to just put it and use that as a CDN.
And one additional comment on whatever we are about to release related on this one, which might actually happen still today, we're just pending for a final review, is going to actually be available immediately. So it will actually target exactly your question, and most likely it's the right suitable solution for you. So please watch dev.office.com/blogs or have a look on the Office Dev Twitter account or my account in Twitter or Office Dev PnP Twitter account. We'll use all of those in the communications. So
great, thank you.
Few more hours, less than 24 hours at least, and there will be something interesting out. Good. Any other questions?
So Nigel, you've pasted something here. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if it's a question or.
It's the classic elevation of privileges.
Right.
Code base.
Yeah, that's just an example of the question I asked about two things back. Which said if we're transcribing C# to TypeScript, does the last point you were talking about with privileges have any effect on the elevated privileges issue when you're accessing lists in TypeScript?
That does not actually work. So the scenario actually how you can make the real elevation to work is that because the TypeScript is always converted to JavaScript. So and within JavaScript we do not have a native way of elevation. So you cannot actually say in the sense of SharePoint elevation, because SharePoint elevation means that, hey, I'm not going to actually execute using that particular account who's using the browser. I'm going to execute the code using either system account or a specific alternative account. The classic way of doing that was with the system account, and that's how everybody has been using that within the server-side code. Now, how can we do that within a client-side web part is related on actually what Waldeck showed today, because it relates on the implicit flow. And why does it relate on that? Well, because you want to actually build a custom web API which is hosted in Microsoft Azure. And that will be secured using the Azure security. But then within your client-side web part, you call that web API, and that web API is then going to do elevation to a specific account or to an app-only token and do the modifications, which the identity who's executing the client-side web part does not have permissions. Hopefully that did make sense. It's just a natural kind of a limitation in JavaScript, because we can't, in JavaScript, I cannot say that, hey, I'm going to run the JavaScript in an alternative identity. That capability doesn't exist.
So I don't need to elevate privileges to access lists in SharePoint when I use TypeScript.
So if the person who is running executing the TypeScript, or in the end, it's a TypeScript is always converted to JavaScript, and then that's running in a browser. If the person has permissions to a SharePoint list, then those permissions are still there. If the person does not have, if you have a scenario, let's say classic scenario where we want to collect feedback from our end users related on whatever event or whatever, you probably don't want that all of the end users have access to all of the other people's answers as well. So you would actually implement that in a way that you have a secured SharePoint list where the users do not have access to read or write. And that's where you need to elevate.
Or for that case, you could just flip the bit, right, and give them only access to their own items.
Well, theoretically, yes. Yeah, fair point. But again, if you're running in JavaScript, you have the same permissions what the user is having by clicking the browser. So if user have permissions to the SharePoint list, the JavaScript has permissions to the SharePoint list as well.
Okay. So if I wanted all the users to be able to access a list, but without giving them permissions, can I do that?
You would have to implement a secured web API. The JavaScript would be using the Azure AD and implicit flow to call that secured web API hosted in Microsoft Azure. That's the one which is then using app only or a specific account to write to that list. So answer is yes, but the scenario gets much more complex in those kind of scenarios. And that's why we want to actually get an article out and a sample out and all of that out so that people are able to understand what needs to happen.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Vesa. Thank you, Patrick.
Yep, absolutely. Any other questions, comments from anybody?
I have a question on the Office UI Fabric that was being discussed this week on Gitter.
Yes.
Is SharePoint intended, or will it at some point begin to use the UI Fabric?
Yes. So all of the modern UIs and all of the modern UX is pretty much already using at least the Office UI Fabric styles. And within certain time frame, all of the UIs will be aligning more and more to the Office UI Fabric React components as well, which are, however, in a pretty early alpha state. Well, not in alpha state, I would say beta stage at this point. So the chosen framework for SharePoint engineering is React. But it doesn't mean that you have to do React. And then as part of that chosen framework to React, it doesn't matter which framework you actually use, you should be aligning to Office UI Fabric. And the SharePoint UIs will be aligning to Office UI Fabric. So if you have a look, for example, the latest, I think we did an announcement around the modern pages, which are now available in theme sites. I think we hopefully have made that announcement already, or then I'm leaking already something. But all of the modern things, or let's say modern document libraries, modern lists, they are using Office UI Fabric as the styling language or UI definitions.
Okay, thank you.
Which, by the way, makes a lot of sense. Let's make sure that if we are preaching for every single developer that they should be using Office UI Fabric, wouldn't it make sense that the SharePoint would be using that as well? And answer is obviously that yes, it does. It just takes a while for us to catch up as well.
And Sebastian, thank you for that. We'll try and pass that information on to the folks at the site that the components aren't loading. That's obviously suboptimal, so we'll try and get that addressed. All right. Well, if there's no
okay. So the component, sorry, the site, the Fabric site has some issues. Sorry, I missed that, right? Are we talking about that one? So probably shouldn't say this out loud, but later today there will be a massive rebuild of a new release of the Fabric site, and that's probably related on that one. So there will be a significant changes on the Fabric portal, and which will then have much more additional information and where we're heading and all of that. And that probably the problem what you're seeing is related on that.
Ah. Good to know.
Yes. Cool.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I really appreciate everybody's time. And like I said, we will have a meeting next week. And then following that, we will skip a week skip the first week of October. And this will transition after next week to a bi-weekly meeting. Just a reminder about that. Thanks to Waldeck. I know he had to drop, but thanks to him for a great demo again. And just a reminder, if anybody writes a web part and would like to demo it on this call, please just get in touch, complex or simple. Every demo is valuable, and it's great to share with the community. So encourage folks who have interest to do that. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Vesa, do you have anything to close out?
No, not really. Not really. We'll update the invites accordingly. And by the way, on the Nigel's questions on the office hours, we'll, like mentioned yesterday in office hours, we'll rebrand the office hours as a special interest group for the CSUM core component and the PnP engine and the PowerShell. We're not going to change the schedule. So if you do have office hours invite already within your calendar, that's the schedule. We cannot update the invite just to have additional or updated text and description. And we'll work with Patrick to get the JavaScript interest group invite updated as well as a bi-weekly invite. But I think that's it. Good.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining. And the recording will be available within 24 hours. I think that's fair. Cool.
Cheers.